All right, welcome everyone. This is, my name is Sarah Wolk. I'm the Executive Director of the Equal Vote Coalition and Star Voting Project. I'm here tonight with Rob Harris from the Independent Party of Oregon, Mark Frohnmeyer, founder of Equal Vote Coalition and co-inventor of Star Voting, and Jason Cotto with our tech team for the Star Elections platform, which is actually hosting the Independent Party primary right now. We've also got Jefferson Smith here to help facilitate, co-host, and ask follow-up questions. Our goal here is to really answer a lot of these questions that we've been getting, get people more engaged, and most importantly, to let everyone know if you are an independent or a non-affiliated voter, your vote by mail ballot has the local races, but if you want to vote on statewide races, you need to participate in the online Independent Party of Oregon primary. And the link to do that, I'm going to say it now, we'll say it again, and we'll say it again, is ipoprimary.com/vote. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Rob Harris.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, I'm Rob Harris. I'm the co-chair of the Independent Party of Oregon. I want to give you a little background for those of you who don't know very much about the Independent Party. Back in 2007, the legislature passed a law that removed the label independent from the ballot. Prior to that, people who were not a member of a party who were candidates could be branded as independent. They said, no, they should be non-affiliated. In response, a couple lawyers got together and formed the Independent Party, which acts as a ballot access to independent candidates. So if an independent, a person who's not a Democrat, not a Republican, not a constitutional party, not a libertarian, wants to try and get on a partisan ballot race, they can come to us and ask for the support of our members. We have 125,000 members now. There's about 965,000 non-affiliated Oregon voters right now. So together there's over 1 million big I and small I independent voters, as I put it. So the first couple of years of the Independent Party, it largely was just a ballot access vehicle for independent candidates. After a couple of years, Oregon passed what was called fusion voting, which allowed candidates to accept the nomination of more than one party. So we had a lot of Republicans and Democrats asking for the independent nomination. And we went through different types of election processes. Most of them involved a nominating caucus. As we went on, we felt like the party needed to develop a little more on its policy end. And instead of just being a ballot access, we wanted to try and put out the issues that a lot of independent voters felt strongly about, but which may not be fully embraced in Salem. Things like campaign finance reform, election reform, environmental regulation, and consumer protection were the first things we developed. And if you go to our website, you'll see some of those platform planks now. We found that that was being embraced by our members, that they did want those sorts of policies to be adopted. And as we continue to develop as a party, we've done a couple of online elections in the past. We were a major party for 2 election cycles where our nominees were selected through the May primary ballot. Recently, because of Motor Voter, the Independent Party is now a minor party, which gives us a great opportunity to partner with Equal Vote and Star Voting. Because what we've discovered as we went through this process is what our independent voters want are more choices, and they don't want to have a binary choice. What Equal Vote does for us is it allows our members to give a score or give a ranking to each of the candidates that are on our ballots. So this is really unique, and combining the independent voters of potentially over 1 million people are eligible to vote. It's hard to get the word out, frankly, for a minor party, but combining that with what Equal Vote provides to really show what voters prefer is really a powerful tool. And we have all the major Democratic and all the major Republican candidates are on the ballot for all of our statewide races. They want this nomination. They're anxious for it, and we're really excited to partner with everybody here. Thanks.
Right. Yeah. So Rob, that last piece was really interesting. And I hadn't realized until we got pretty far into this process that it's not just independent and non-affiliated candidates. The primary is open to candidates from across the political spectrum. So what you really have here is a unified primary using a voting system, star voting, that has no vote splitting, that's highly accurate with any number of parties or candidates in the race. It accomplishes a lot of the goals of the open primary movement, but without the concerns around, one faction kind of gaming the system. Those concerns are all addressed.
I agree. I agree. It's more like an open primary for the state, and there are 1 million eligible voters for this, and theoretically, it could be the biggest primary in the state. Now, we don't have the infrastructure to be able to get the word out to that many people, obviously, but we're going to make a large stride in the power of independent voters, and really to empower the people who have not had a voice in the past. We're real excited.
Yeah, and that's actually a great segue over to Mark Frohnmeyer and why you founded the Equal Vote Coalition originally. I know in 2014, Equal Vote launched the Unified Primary campaign, which was a unified ballot with all the candidates from all the parties as well, also using an alternative voting system that's kind of a predecessor of star voting. And star voting really grew out of that. So can you tell us a bit about what star voting is, who you are?
Yeah, well, and I guess the long backstory, or the shortened version of the long backstory, is I've been intrigued by the political process basically since birth. My father was in politics, and I had the experience in 1990 of watching a gubernatorial campaign with two major party candidates, my dad running as a Republican, Barbara Roberts running as a Democrat, and then an independent candidate named Al Mobley, who was put forth by the Oregon Citizens Alliance. And it was, I'd grown up thinking that democracy was a thing, and that, the will of the people was what elected our representatives. And then I experienced sort of firsthand a so-called spoiled election, where because of the presence of more than two candidates who drew significant numbers of votes in the race, the majority will was not recognized. And in fact, somebody won with significantly less than a majority of the votes. And it was just this, for a 16-year-old kid, it was kind of this shocking moment of realizing that there was a kind of a bug in the democratic process. And it came to find out that bug of plurality voting, where when we're limited to one choice in every election that happens, that's what actually creates the two-party system in itself. That's why we have primaries in the first place, is because our voting method only actually represents the majority view if there are two candidates in every race. And so we end up with this totally polarized and, arguably incredibly dysfunctional political system from top to bottom, where voters feel consistently that their voices aren't heard, that they don't have sufficient options. Of course, when there are only two fighters in the fight, it's very easy for special interests to game the system and to dump money and negative ads on one particular candidate. And it really, the more that I thought about it, the more that it became clear that plurality voting system that we live with really is responsible for, many of the ills that we see in the political process. And so the goal that really set about this quest to find something that would fix that problem. Early on, I was an advocate of systems like instant runoff voting, which let you rank candidates on the ballot, first choice, second choice, third choice. I actually went to a conference called Rebooting Democracy in 2007 that was hosted by Jefferson Smith, and I was all about IRV at that point. And then came to find out that there were bugs and issues in that system, and that was what ultimately led to the proposal of the unified primary in 2014, proposing one ballot where voters could support all the candidates that they wanted. The top two would then go on to the general election. And kind of the inspiration that struck as a result of a conference we held in 2014 was that the score ballot, as simple as 0 to 5 ballot, shows you not just a level of support for each candidate on the ballot, but also embeds within it your preferences. So if you give one candidate a 5 and you give another candidate a 4, that's essentially you saying that you prefer the 5 to the 4. So that use of the score ballot in STAR really let us combine the idea of the unified primary, where you support all the candidates that you want in the first stage, and then you choose between them in the second. Let us combine that into a single vote and a single ballot, which is really sort of the grail in terms of a voting system, is to have something that you can do in one shot. You don't have to have 2 long campaign cycles, but yet with STAR, it's a very accurate voting system. It's a very simple voting system. The entirety of the system can be explained in the four words that form its name: score, then automatic runoff. So that's really the whole system. And the cool opportunity here is that, STAR, we first started conceiving of it in 2014, did a lot of work to figure out how it would work and what the science is and what it should be called. And this is the first time that system now is being used in a real public election. So that's really the awesome thing about this particular moment.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, for taking us through that history. It really is an incredible journey of the election reform movement, the voting reform movement, the movement trying to work on better voter inclusion, the movement trying to work on more expressive and representative ballots and voting methods. So I'm just going to clarify a couple of the key points you touched on. So a unified primary is a primary in which candidates from all parties are included. STAR voting is a voting system where we actually use a 5-star style ballot. And the way that works is you score your candidates from 0 up to 5 stars. You can give any candidate any score you want, but you want to show your preference order, your level of support for all of them. The way it's tabulated, the top 2 highest scoring candidates are finalists that advance to an automatic runoff, and you don't have to vote a second time. Your ballot already shows which finalist you prefer. So STAR voting really allows us to vote our conscience, show our preference order, not worry about wasting your vote on a candidate that can't win. You don't have to worry about spoilers. You just honestly score your candidates, and the most representative winner wins. So here we are in kind of the future of this movement. We've launched the independent party primary, which is the first election to use STAR voting for a statewide election. The primary is open to over 1 million eligible voters. In Oregon, that's the largest voting bloc in Oregon, non-affiliated and independents. And STAR Elections is a branch of the STAR Voting Project that was set up in order to really address this demand that we started getting of, hey, we want to use STAR voting. How do we do that? And of course, our answer is we would love to facilitate that. You can do STAR voting. It's compatible with vote by mail. It's compatible with online voting. We have an online app called star.vote where you can set up a poll and you can use it for informal elections. But we really wanted to offer a secure, credentialed process that organizations like the Independent Party of Oregon could use for real government elections with credentialing, voter verification, and security that really could be a gold standard, better than e-voting elsewhere. So Jay is one of the leaders on our programming and software team. Jay, do you want to tell us a little bit about STAR Elections and what the project has been to be able to do our first online election?
Yeah, absolutely. So before that, let me just give a little background on me, because I feel I'm a little different from everyone else on this call in a couple ways. One, I don't have a long history in politics. I do have a very long history in software development. I've been building systems for startups to Fortune 500 companies since a previous century, and have done, worked in a lot of industries, from electric power, nuclear power plant stuff, pharmaceutical R&D, heavy manufacturing, a lot of very mission critical systems. So, my background, both at undergrad and graduate degrees in computer science, and that's really the background that I come from. And I'm a newcomer to Oregon also. I've just been here about a year and a half. And in fact, we moved into Eugene November 2nd of 2018, just 4 days before the 2018 election. And my first exposure to star voting was these lawn signs all over town. And at that point, I had never heard of star voting, but I was familiar with ranked choice voting. And I was familiar with the fundamental problem that it addresses of fairer elections when you have more than two candidates. And so I came to study that, and through that I came to meet Sarah and Mark and got involved with the STAR team because I came to recognize how star voting is actually the next level of evolution of those ideas. And it really combines the best parts of ranked choice voting plus some other progressive voting systems that support more than two candidates. And in the case of what we're doing with star elections, it's taking the core engine that has existed for years at star.voting, which supports kind of informal polling. And it adds to it all the other industrial strength stuff that you need to really have a secure election for, binding offices. So we added to it a lot of thinking and work related to registering voters and validating them, and a process that incorporates volunteers and automated systems to ensure that it's easy for eligible voters to vote, and it's hard for invalid voters to vote. Right? We have voter fraud detection. We have other kinds of systems to credential everyone. We, as Sarah mentioned, star elections is all about facilitating the parties like the Independent Party of Oregon, where it would be great if everything that we're doing with everything that's being done with STAR was actually on the official mail-in ballot managed by the Secretary of State of Oregon. They have great systems. They do a great job. It's been validated. It's been proven and refined over 20 years. Oregon leads the country in mail-in voting.
Right.
And I consider that really to be the gold standard. But the fact of the matter is that only two parties get the benefit of all of that infrastructure. And there's 40% of registered voters in Oregon that are non-affiliated or with the Independent Party or with other minor parties. And they don't get the benefit of that funding. They don't have that infrastructure. So Star Elections is all about trying to make the best infrastructure possible available to those organizations to be able to have a credible, secure primary.
Right. And I just want to give Rob a chance to chime in there. I know talking with Sal, who's another Independent Party board member, he was telling me a bit about what those numbers would have been for the Independent Party to offer vote by mail. He explained to me that you're not even allowed to opt in to kind of piggyback with the system that the other parties are using. Really, it's baked into the system at the Secretary of State level right now that minor parties are excluded from that infrastructure that all of us pay into as taxpayers.
Yeah, that's right. Interestingly, Secretary of State Dennis Richardson had a bill that would have expanded that and allowed minor parties to utilize in some way the primary ballot. Unfortunately, Dennis passed away, and that bill, which was a priority of his, didn't move under the new secretary. But there have been proposals to, as you say, piggyback or utilize the Secretary of State services, which we all pay for, as you say, to allow and empower non-affiliated and minor parties We've talked to them several times about that. There's just no momentum for that. Consequently, we here in this video, people who worked hard behind the scenes, Jay, Mark, Sarah, and many others, have, through their own hard work and volunteer service, put this together to try and make sure the voice of those independent voters are heard.
Right. So bringing it back to you, Jay, do you want to, since, you know, as we've said, you know, vote by mail wasn't an option for over 1 million voters without public funding, but Star Elections has really offered an incredible online voting platform. Could you just give us a quick walkthrough from a user perspective of, let's say I'm independent and I want to vote right now, what would I see?
You would first go to the entry page. Which one was it, Sarah? Give us that plug again.
Yeah. If you want to vote, just go to indparty.com, indparty.com/vote. And there's a link right there that says, you know, we're hosting the election's live now. You click that link and it takes you to the Star Elections registration page.
Exactly. And that registration page is an app that works either in a desktop or with any smartphone. And it just collects some basic information about the voter that allows us to validate them against the voter file. Basically your name, your birth date, and your address. That information then is transferred into our database. And also at that point, you get an email with a link to actually cast your vote. You can also continue right from the registration directly to vote if you want. But it's a simple online process. After you enter your personal information about who you are, where you live, your birth date, you then upload one document, like preferably a photo of your paper ballot. Just some proof associating your name with your address so that we can validate who you are.
Exactly.
And then you immediately go on to actually cast your vote, which for each race, for each candidate, you choose a value from 0 to 5, indicating your level of support. And you then submit your ballot. Once you do that, a couple things happen. One is you get another email, and that email is going to have a printout of exactly how you voted. And that email even includes a QR code. And if you scan that code, you can come right back to an online page and you can verify that the vote that you cast matches what you received in the email, what you have in the email matches what we have online. In the background, your ballot goes into a system that allows us to have at least 2 human beings review your ballot and the documentation you uploaded to verify that you are an eligible voter. And in cases where sometimes people move, there can be certain ambiguities where we're trying to be as inclusive as possible. So we have a lot of volunteers that are working that system. And if ever there is a discrepancy, we're doing a lot of outreach to those voters to try and resolve any of those concerns and actually have their ballots be verified, validated, and count towards the election.
Yeah.
So really, overall, what Star Elections is doing is that combination of infrastructure to facilitate collecting the ballots, doing the credentialing, and also the voter support. In this particular race, the ballot is cast via an online vote. We could, with just a little twist, have those be paper ballots that got mailed in and then were scanned and would still go through the same credentialing and customer voter support process. So it's a flexible system, and what it is doing is addressing the fact that IPO has great depth of expertise on all of the issues and the politics and the history and of supporting democracy and supporting the voters. But these issues of technology and that infrastructure to actually facilitate it is a separate area of expertise, and that's really where we kind of dovetail.
Yeah, and thank you, Jay. I know you've put in, you know, way more hours than one would think were possible in the day since this project launched. I also want to give a shout out to Steen Munter, who is the software developer that's the project lead on this, starting with star.vote, which is once again, the website where anyone can just host a poll or a casual election. Steen Munter's been an incredible force behind this project for years. But I did want to ask Jay one clarifying question. Can you tell us what are the 3 races that are on this ballot?
One is a presidential preference poll, just to allow all of the voters to kind of indicate between Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, and Donald Trump where their preference lies. And with STAR, you can pick more than one. You can express that value between 0 to 5 for all of the candidates. There's also the Attorney General and the state treasurer races, and those races you can only vote on those online.
So it's Secretary of State and then State Treasurer, right?
Right. And unfortunately, the paper ballot for unaffiliated and independent voters doesn't let you express, doesn't let you vote on those offices. So it's only through this online option. So as much as we would like to have it just be a single process for voters, working within the constraints that we have now until we can change those laws, they really need to cast both a paper ballot for their local offices, as well as casting an online ballot for that Secretary of State and State Treasurer.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. That definitely answered my questions, and it really is an elegant solution that I'm personally really proud of, and glad we're able to offer. So we've also got with us one more person who hasn't had a chance to speak much yet. Jefferson Smith is from X-Ray FM. So as kind of an outside perspective, I know you've been involved in democratic reform, voting reform, election reform for a long time. What do you think people might want to know? What questions would you like to ask that might bring forward a perspective that, we're just not thinking of because we're so immersed in this?
Yeah, I'll put whatever thoughts I have in the form of a question. And I'll start, Rob, with you. How do you feel about online voting as a matter of policy, including on a scaled up level? How would you feel about it if we were voting online to pick a president of the United States?
Interestingly enough, over the past several months, we had some conversations with people who were real advocates for online voting, and we considered going that direction with a secure mobile voting system. It was a large nonprofit that's pretty well known nationwide for election reforms. We talked to a couple of mobile voting platform providers. There were issues with that. I did a lot of reading on that. I'm certainly not an expert at it, but I was looking at some of the information that's available. The important thing with elections is to make sure that people feel confident in the results. And right now, I don't know if we're going to have a binding presidential election to elect electors and the next president of the United States, people would feel that comfortable with a purely online option. I think people are very comfortable here in Oregon and mostly nationwide with the mail ballots. I think there's some merit to continue to pursue some of the online secure voting as long as they test out, very accurate and secure. I'm not an expert on it. In this particular case, we're using this system with which I'm extremely impressed by the tech team here. They've jumped right on it. They fixed every issue that we raised. And if you know Sal Peralta, he's sort of a computer guy too, and he's part of the independent party. And we both had a lot of questions about this, and we made him jump through a lot of hoops, and we probably irritated him quite a bit during this process. But they did it on short order, and they did an excellent job. And the fact of the matter is, this is the option we have as an independent party. Without the support of taxpayers, without the millions of dollars that our tax money goes to help to run a mail-in ballots mailing system, voting system, this is our option. It's a very good option that's been put together here, and it'll achieve a really nice result for us.
Mark, let me take a crack at asking you a question, and you can answer it however you want, including answering the previous question.
Well,
What would success look like for you in this process, and what would failure look like in this process that you hope to avoid?
Ooh, great question, Jeff. So I'll start by answering the previous question a little bit more. In terms of, just to be clear, the online component, the gold standard for elections and voting is Oregon's vote by mail system. There's no question about that. And in fact, the big problem with it, with an online system, is how do you credential the voter so you don't have fraud? And what we've done is actually just encourage voters to take a picture of their mail-in ballot. Right. So we're actually kind of piggybacking on vote by mail to do the online voting piece in as secure a way as possible. Mm-hmm. I think the question around what does success look like, what does failure look like? To me, we started with success in that star voting needed to be tried in a real election in order for it to ever be adopted for use in real elections. The biggest, and one of the people on Facebook asked, what's the biggest criticism of star voting? And the biggest criticism of star voting for adopting it in use in elections is that it hasn't been used in elections, for public elections. So this opportunity has been a chance to actually, and the IPO had a choice between using an existing voting method that had been proven out in previous elections before, or are they going to, do the Oregon way and pioneer something new? And they rolled the dice and said, we're going to try something new, and we're going to try this star voting thing that nobody's done. So we started from a position of like, this is a major milestone forward for the movement. I think what really worried us going in was that we would have, the election would get hacked, or we wouldn't have credentials that people would stuff the ballot box and so on and so forth. And so that's why that security question has repeatedly come up, and the big aha that we got to was that we would actually encourage people to use their mail-in ballots essentially as their credentials. And then I think the other question is just, do people understand what are we going to divine after the election from the results of how people voted? Did they actually understand the system? Or, a lot of people have said, oh, people, 0 to 5 star voting, that's way too complicated. We don't think it is. We think anyone who's used Amazon can figure out 5 stars. But the real question is, when people actually do have a chance to try it out, will they like it? Will they think it's good to have that level of expressiveness? Will they understand the system? So I think after the fact, we're going to be able to go back and talk to folks and see, was it a success in the mind of the voters? Was it a success in the mind of the IPO? And is it worth taking this to public elections on a broader scale?
And Jay wanted to ask you a question.
Sure.
What was the trickiest coding challenge? And if it was security, what was the trickiest part of the security coding challenge? And if it was anonymity or whatever it was, how did you solve that challenge?
There are a lot of ways that there are a lot of things we had to consider, right? A lot of ways to get around the system. Some of it was very nerdy stuff. There was issues with just protecting our systems from hackers with a kind of a multi-layered defense to prevent getting into the system. Another thing was the issue of making sure that there weren't multiple votes for the same voter, right? And being able to detect if there were fraudulent votes cast.
So how do you do that? And if it's by looking at the cookies, you can just turn off your cookies. How do you keep it, other than the cookies, from people voting lots of times?
Well, there's a lot you can do. And I don't want to go into too much detail on some of the algorithms, because I don't want this to be
coding in the next 2 minutes.
Yeah, but it's much more than cookies. It's looking at IP addresses. It's relating the voter ID to the email address. It's being able to then correlate if there were if there were a multiple, if there's suspicious activity, that automatically raises tickets in our help system, and we have volunteers tracking this stuff down. So a lot of the technology was figuring out the right blend of raising issues to humans to investigate, without generating a lot of noise. So making use of that human capital.
Sarah, you may want to add to that, but I also want to ask you a question, because I recognize the experiment here. You're grateful to the tech team for being able to provide a service that a vote by mail service system wasn't offered to you. But the test here isn't as much on Jay. The test here is on you and on Mark and the star voting system and what we can learn from that. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on the question I asked Mark: what does success and failure look like? What do you hope to glean from this? But then I have another question I want to ask both you and Mark before I shut up.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Jay was talking about before I move on, really a lot of our processes have been balancing a convenient user experience, making it really easy and accessible to vote, with the election security priorities on our end, which of course, as our first major election that we're actually officiating as this new organization, Star Elections, success is that it's a valid election. So we want to take it from voters feeling like it's accessible, they can make it through the process, to getting to try out star voting for the first time. What's been interesting is I'm running the second tier of our credentialing process. And so we have tier 1, which is volunteer run, and the volunteers look at every credential that come in. All those volunteers sign an agreement for privacy and security as well. But anything that's doesn't have the right documentation or it's illegible, whatever, it gets flagged. And then it comes to tier 2, which is a much smaller group of people. And we're seeing all sorts of things like, I don't know how to upload a photo on my phone, to, what is e-voting and why are you doing this? But the one question we haven't seen is, what is star voting and how do I do it? Really, the 5-star voting platform, it's just like a 5-star rating. More people have actually done that worldwide than voting itself. We've actually reached that point, and we've reached the future where the 5-star platform is really encoded in our DNA. We have 5 fingers. It's just very simple to say 5 stars is great, 4 stars is pretty good, 1 star, it's better than my worst case scenario, but I really would only support that person if
that's the question. Wait a minute. 1 star, there's 0 stars, so 1 star is still okay?
Right.
I thought 3 stars was okay.
0 is I hate you.
Stars.
0 is the worst candidate on the ballot. And if you leave a candidate blank, they also get a 0. So if somebody hasn't won your support, they haven't earned your support, you don't know who they are, you don't like them, you can leave them blank with star voting and they'll get a 0.
So I want to engage with, because to some degree this is becoming an experiment about online voting, but I know that its impetus for the Independent Party and its impetus for, I think, everybody on this phone call was, how do we actually have that experiment that we can show to a legislator, to a county commissioner, to a voter for a city council initiative that was put on by ballot initiative, that this thing can work, that people can use it, and that people can grow comfort. Sarah, and then I want to ask my follow-up question to Mark. Anything else you want to add about what success looks like? You maybe already just said it, which was, well, it looks like all the questions that are coming in are about the online portion, are about like, how are you going to keep this secure, whatever. And the questions aren't like, how do I count to 5? That part's easy. So is it already to you showing that success? Is there any other success you're looking for?
Yeah. So like Mark said, basically star voting tops the charts in terms of election accuracy. It eliminates vote splitting. It's compatible with the top-notch auditing protocols and election security protocols. It's compatible with vote by mail. It's compatible with the future of democracy, the very best that we can possibly envision. And the only downside that's ever cited that's credible and really checks out is, this is new. Should we really be the first? And Eugene has now said, yes, we want to be the first. So the conversation has flipped from, oh, we don't want to be first, to now we really do see major municipalities in Oregon saying, we want to be first. Eugene voters, 54% have already voted yes when we broke it down in the Lane County-wide ballot initiative in 2018. But who gets to be first is no longer the question. Rob Harris and the IPO they've won that foot race. And so now we're able to offer this proof of concept, and we're going to be able to offer metadata on the election. We're going to be able to offer that empirical data to people who really want to ask us the hard questions. And when people ask Star Voting the hard questions is when it shines.
Mark, let me ask you this, and then some other folks might want to pile on. What's the next thing? Is the next thing bringing it back to Eugene? Is the next thing trying to convince a caucus of the legislature they ought to do it? Is the next thing going to a major party, say the Democratic Party, that just went through a presidential primary where Marianne Williamson lasted longer than Cory Booker and Kamala Harris, even though I would suspect, without knocking Marianne Williamson, she might have been a lot of people's 9th choice and Cory Booker might have been a lot of people's 5th choice. That what's the next big move, the next 2 or 3 big moves you think for Star Voting?
Well, yeah, I think, and the presidential primaries on both sides of the aisle, this last cycle this current cycle with the Democrats, and then the last cycle with the Republicans, where you have, more than a dozen candidates all running, you have just massive vote splitting, and it's very, very difficult to divine what the true will of the electorate is. So we definitely see that those use cases are these shining examples out there that are ripe for change. In terms of the immediate next step, we had a petition to put this on the ballot in Eugene that was signed by an appropriate number of valid Eugene voters. Through the counting processes at the county, tangled a bit back and forth, but we now are asking the City Council of Eugene to put it on the November ballot. So that's sort of the immediate first next step. And I think, if anything, this election, the fact that it now has been used or is being used in an election, that is going to come before the council's decision whether to put it on the ballot. So this, in essence, this online election that we are doing right now is a major help forward in that effort. There's now an initiative petition in Troutdale to put it on the ballot for Troutdale municipal elections. And we're seeing more and more support from statewide candidates to include Star Voting as part of their platforms for Oregon. I mean, ultimately, this is not an anti-partisan effort in any way. The parties are not to blame for the two-party system. The parties are an inevitable outcome of the way that we vote right now. And unfortunately, that just ends up shutting out more and more and more voters and ending up with hyper-partisan political processes. So the goal eventually is to get this to be the way that we do elections, to repair our political process and sort of return sanity to politics and public policy nationally.
Right. Yeah. And so Star Voting, what I think is really incredible about it is that it addresses so many problems. For me, the big problem is that I want to be able to vote my conscience. I want to be able to honestly support the candidate that I love the most, whether or not they're electable, whether or not the polls favor them, whether or not they're a media darling. I want my vote to never be wasted. I want to be able to express my preference order so that if my favorite can't win, my vote still counts and makes a difference. I want my elections to be secure, and I want them to be auditable. I want them to be logistically viable so that, taxpayers don't go bankrupt trying to implement a super overcomplicated system. I know, Oregon used alternative voting 100 years ago, and ranked voting type systems have been implemented and repealed around the world over the last 100 years really widely, sometimes for bad reasons, like people don't want representative outcomes. They don't want the people fairly represented. But often those repeals have been based on valid criticisms, like centralized tabulation. You have to get all the ballots in one place. You can't do that without losing chain of custody. Star voting doesn't have those problems. Star voting eliminates vote splitting and the spoiler effect. It doesn't just mitigate it. Systems like ranked choice mitigate those problems, but we're really taking it a lot further with this. And then the last thing I wanted to add on that is that star voting is so versatile. So we've been talking about single winner races like presidential elections, governor's races, Secretary of State, but star voting can also be used for multi-winner elections like Troutdale City Council. They elect 3 people, and we could elect the top 3 people so that the best candidates win in that scenario. We also could use star voting for proportional representation, which is a method for tabulating the same ballot. From the voter's experience, it would be exactly the same, but that would allow candidates with a quarter of the support to win 1 out of 4 seats on a council. And so that's a really great way to like have a diverse council that's able to really represent diverse viewpoints all at once. And star voting works fantastically for all of the above.
And Rob, I got to finish with you. So at some level, this is an experiment of a system of voting, but for you, this is picking who your candidates are going to be. I think this is intended to be a binding vote for your political party on who your standard bearer for Secretary of State, et cetera, is going to be. So you might say something about what success looks like for you or what failure might look like for you. And then also what a next step might be for the independent party, because this election could matter, right? In a Secretary of State race that's close, don't know if one's going to be close, but already you've got a non-affiliated candidate who was a prominent Republican legislator. You have a Republican presumptive nominee who's a current or former legislator, and you've got at least three, a number of strong Democratic Party candidates who are running as well. And if there end up being a close Secretary of State's race, independent party essentially endorsement, that nomination could help a lot a candidate. So what are you hoping for out of this?
Well, I think you really put your finger on it. Let's talk about that Secretary of State's race a little bit. This isn't just an exercise in an online poll. It's not just a KATU poll or a Bill Post poll or something like this. The winner of this race is, if it's Mr. Weil, if it's Ken Smith, who are not Democrats or Republicans, if they're the winner, their name's going to be on that November ballot, going to every single Oregon voter as an independent candidate. That's a significant legal right that they've had. And we have the ability as a political party, legally recognized political party, to grant that right using this election. It is binding. Whoever wins this election is going to be the Secretary of State independent nominee. That's a victory for us. The victory is this election is up and running. The victory is we are successfully taking votes. I suspect some people will say, boy, that's, 1 million people. How come you didn't have 800,000 people voting? Simply not going to happen, because we don't have a mailing going to every single house. We don't have all the news stations and the online pundits talking about this all the time. We don't have tons of advertising going on and television.
A Zoom webinar, though. You don't think the Zoom webinar is enough? Come on, you got a Zoom webinar.
Far and wide. We're going viral tonight.
Yeah, unfortunately, we did cancel our door-to-door canvassing.
But that is a level of success, and I think it's substantial. And I think it's telling. It's important to note that the Secretary of State candidates, in particular, all put their name in. None of them chose not to participate in this election. They value the nomination. They valued the way this election was put together by the great technical team. They valued the star voting process, and they know that this is valuable. They may not talk about it too much, but they know that there's value to what's going on here. Now, a second level, so I think we met our level of success by opening up this election and taking votes with, as far as I know, no real problems here. I mean, there's help tickets, there's issues. Certainly there always is. I'm not saying that's not happening, but this is going extremely smoothly. This is going extremely well. The winner here is going to have the legally valid right to put independent and put their name on the ballot. There's almost no other way. It would be very difficult for Mr. Weil to get on the ballot in any other way, given the lockdown. It'd be very difficult to get 20,000 signatures or to hold a convention of 1,000 people. So this is an important election. That's a success. Would I like to have, 10,000, 20,000, 25,000 voters? Absolutely. but we're going to get enough votes to clearly indicate the preferences of the independent voters in Oregon. I mean, most polling, what's a valid poll? If you have 450 or 550 results in a standard poll, I think people consider that relatively valid poll. We're going to have a lot more than that. And I feel very comfortable, very confident that we're going to have a great outcome, and it's going to clearly reflect the preferences of the majority of independent voters in Oregon.
Well, I'll finish there. I hope to be able to follow up with you all. I'm fascinated by this stuff. And whether it's coming on X-Ray or doing a thing on Democracy Nerd, would love to follow up with questions, but I also want to be sensitive to the hour. And thank you very much for letting me participate and for the experiment you're engaging in. And with that, Sarah, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, we actually have one question that came in from our online viewers, and it's from Matt Sayer. He says, what is the case against star voting? And I think it's a good question, and maybe Mark, you want to field that one?
Yeah, well, and we touched in on that a little bit. Just that the primary argument against it has been that it's not ever been used in a public election, and so how can we ever risk using it in a public election if it hasn't already been used in a public election? That this nice answer. Some other criticisms people have brought up. They've said, well, some voters might not use the full range. They might only use 3 to 5 and not use 0 to 2. And then they'll, or some voters might only use up to a score of 3. And that would give certain other voters more power. The reality is that because of the runoff step, that is where your preference is used in the final tally, whether you're using 0s and 1s or 0s and 5s, you still, your vote always goes to the finalist that you preferred on the ballot, or the vote of no preference if you gave them the same score.
So one ballot is one vote. Every person gets one vote, and every vote has an equal weight, which is why it's the Equal Vote Coalition.
So I want to set up the straw person, and then you guys can knock it down. I think there are two counter arguments that I have heard that resonate. One is it's a spin on the people haven't done it before, but it is more confusing than a binary choice. There's more to keep track of. There are more candidates. I don't have to just go to the ballot and remember one name. I have to understand all the names and have some view on all the names, or at least as many as, at least potentially more than one. And that might impact some set of voters, maybe lower information voters, maybe folks that don't have as much extra time to nerd out on politics as much as the 5 of us on this call might be. And I think that is a legitimate thing to respond to. A second critique is essentially the Mark Frohnmeyer's dad critique. It is not the critique by your dad, but a critique that
they have a dad
probably might have of your dad.
Oh, okay.
which is that the truth doesn't necessarily lie in the middle. That if what we do is have a voting system that reduces the incentive to draw distinctions. Donald Trump taught America that if you could get a lot of attention just by beating the heck out of somebody in a debate, and even if it made a lot of people not like you, you got a lot of attention. This would sort of flip that dynamic, and a lot of people would like that dynamic to be flipped. But for people who think that climate change is 100% real, not half real, who think that wealth disparities are a full problem, not half a problem, for people who think that democracy is something that everybody should care about, not just half the electorate should care about, that people who think that same-sex marriage is something that everybody should have a moral right to, and that isn't just half an answer, that all of a sudden the answer doesn't necessarily nest where, a party trying to find itself in the middle would find itself.
So I'm going to answer both of those. And then Sarah, if you want to jump in as well. So one, in terms of the complexity piece of it, or the if you want to use this system, just as you use your ballot today, you can vote your one favorite candidate, the one name, give that candidate a 5 and move on. That works. That is a valid vote in star voting. If on the other hand, you have more of an opinion than just that, you can also express it with star voting, right? If you've got an opinion on 2 of the candidates, you can express that in an opinion. And if you have an opinion on every single candidate in the field, you can express it with star voting. So fully backward compatible with the way that we vote now, but a lot more expression for, poll your friends, see if any of them have an opinion about multiple candidates in, say, the race for president, right? So that's how I would answer question number 1. As to question number 2, it's like this: are we going to end up with just sort of the average of all views in the candidates that we elect. I think it's more that we're going to get to parse out the candidates that we actually agree with on every different issue that we believe in. Right now, every issue gets lumped into one side or the other in one of the two parties. So when you vote for a candidate, you're voting for a whole platform that the party has agreed on, and you're yes on this and no on this and yes on this and no on this and yes on this and no on this. When in reality, you might have the gun lover who also cares about the climate, and they can vote a 5 on the candidate that matches them perfectly, right? So what you're going to end up with, possibly, we think, is the candidate that actually matches on every issue, matches the majority in that area where they're elected, if there are enough candidates in the race, rather than you always having to choose potentially only half of the issues that you really care about, and depending on which special interests have aligned in one or the other of the major parties. Does that make sense?
Thanks for the answer.
Yeah, and so I would love to answer that question too about, why not just stick with choose one only voting? It's so simple. Voters know how to do it. We've been doing it for forever. There's actually a ton of statistical data that's been done on preferential voting, more expressive ballots around the world. And even in the first election, where people try a new system that they're unfamiliar with, the polling's come back overwhelmingly positive, that voters really like the ability to express their opinion. They're really inspired by the ability to express their opinion and to feel like their vote's not going to be wasted. Right now in our country, around 48, 47, something like that, percentage of voters aren't affiliated with a major party. And that's also really close to the percentage of Americans that don't vote in presidential elections. So these are voters that are disenfranchised in part by the system itself, but are also disenfranchised by the fact that they don't feel empowered in the political space. They don't feel like their vote can make a difference, like their voice will be heard. And star voting, to me, really gives back that power to the people. It guarantees a majority preferred winner. But if you are in a minority faction, star voting still guarantees that you have the ability to have a voice and to pull that winner closer to you. You're able to vote against your worst case scenario. So even if you don't win, you might have a winner that's closer to you. And so when we say, is star voting going to elect just the centrist or something, I think we really have to redefine our concept of the center, because we've got right now a really, I think, warped view of the political spectrum where it is a false binary, left and right, blue versus red. And we've basically got most of the country caught in the crossfires in between. But the middle of the spectrum, in my opinion, and I'm going to out myself personally, is I don't think the typical centrist is the center of public opinion. I think the center of public opinion are issues like public health and safety, access to education, clean air that we can breathe, and beautiful places that we can go to. And so I think those are the kind of centrist issues that maybe aren't centrist issues right now, but would be if we had a more expressive, more representative system.
And let me just say to the person who offered that, I think, helpful question, the critiques I offered, I think, are more powerful critiques of instant runoff voting, of ranked choice voting, both the sort of milquetoast critique and the complexity critique. I think for people who like star voting, and I think everybody on this call is on this call because they like it, that one of the reasons they like it is because it addresses both of those in ways that instant runoff voting, ranked choice voting more typically doesn't, even though we might also prefer instant runoff voting to the current system.
Yeah, and just to clarify, election science, the entire field is pretty much in consensus that our current choose one only system is the least representative, the least accurate. And somebody did a recent study and they sent it in to me. And once you get up to like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 candidates in the race, the likelihood of electing the right winner was actually closer to like random than it was to accurate. So that is an easily solvable problem. We can have elections that are accurate with more than 2 candidates, more than 3 candidates, more than 10 candidates. And lately, you know, we've been seeing the Democratic primary with 20 some candidates, the 2016 Republican primary with 20 some candidates. And these don't have to be a race to the bottom. We can really have representative outcomes across the board.
Well, Sarah, thanks so much for pulling us together. That was really interesting and it was fun to be a part of.
Yeah, being here.
Thanks a lot. I also want to jump in on a question that was asked on Facebook. The question, just real quick, was asked, who will pay for conducting the elections if this were adopted in, say, someplace like Eugene? Something to remember is that one of the things, great things that Star Voting does for a nonpartisan election, which is what we're trying to get done in Eugene and Lane County and Troutdale and so on, is that it lessens the number of elections for those nonpartisan races. So that instead of candidates potentially having to run 2 elections, one in the spring, one in November, you just do 1 vote in November, and that 1 vote is much more accurate than the 2 votes that the city and the county would pay for. So the cost of implementation, and we've talked the nuts and bolts with our election software vendor. You can run all of the scanning and everything that we already do with our existing ballots. You can make a star ballot, you can run the scanning and come up with a cast vote record. It takes a 40-line script of Python code to tabulate an election using our existing software and scanners and get a star result. Now, that software vendor would have to verify that and certify it and all that. And they estimated, when I talked to them on the phone, that cost was going to be around $50,000. But when you look at that $50,000 against the cost of running 1 election, it pays for itself right out the gates. So if we estimate that if we did this in Eugene and Lane County, we'd save about $170,000 every 2 years, just because you wouldn't actually have to send out those spring ballots to people who don't have partisan elections to vote. Anyway, saves money for the county, saves money for the city.
Yeah.
Comes up with better results. And now it's been used or is being used in a real election.
And saves money for candidates too, just to throw that in there. Right now for candidates, if you're not a career candidate, most people can't afford to quit their day job and campaign for a year straight for a job that they may or may not get elected to, and that for local office often doesn't really pay anything, or in the case of like Eugene Mayor, for example, it's just a stipend. They're not even on salary. So if we had a more streamlined, simple, shorter election cycle, just 1 general election, that would allow grassroots candidates that aren't bought and sold by big money interests, and more representative candidates to compete on an even platform.
Yeah, and let's be real, if you're saving money for candidates, you're really saving dollars that they have to raise from somebody that, somewhere down the road is going to, it's our political system is awash in cash. And if we can cut 1 election out of the process, half of that run, that's half of the dollars, half of the influence. So there are lots of benefits here.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to, condemn the elected officials that we have. They have to compete in the system we have. They have to play the game the way that it's laid out for them. But we could really reduce the influence of money in politics. And I think our good candidates would benefit from that, and the bad actors wouldn't just have a monopoly anymore. But in closing, I want to get out the action items again. So in order to vote in the independent party primary, it's going on right now. The election is open until May 19th. You just go to endparty.com/vote to get a ballot link and cast your vote. If you want to volunteer and get right now, voice from the ether there. If you want to get involved with Star Voting, Star Elections, and volunteer, you can go to starvoting.us. That's our main website for Star Voting overall. And if you want to host an election, you should go to star.vote, and that allows you to host a casual poll, but there's also more secure options. So if you do want to do a more secure election, or even an entirely government level election like what we're doing here, you can contact us at info@equal.vote for election consulting. Is there anything else that we should get out there before we call this meeting a wrap? We're a little bit over time, but it's been a great discussion, and it's really great to see, you know, 4 incredible organizations really partnering and coalitioning to offer voter access and voter voice.
Thanks, Sarah. I appreciate the opportunity.
It's been great working with you.
Thanks, y'all. Appreciate
Remember
it.
to vote.
Right on.
Yeah. All right, everyone go home, log off, and pull out your ballot.
Bye, everybody.
Probably already are at home. Ballot's nearby. All right, take care all.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.